Welcome to the Nonfiction Writers, podcasting in a great way. I'm Ryan Aber, joined by Jason Kersey, and we're to talk depth chart because it is actually game week. We have a game to look forward to this Saturday, OU against Akron.
Thank God. It's finally. I love. I don't know about you, but I enjoy this routine. Like I like the game week, the season in season routine. I like the press conference Monday, the post-practice availability Monday, Tuesday, and then Wednesday with Bob Stoops, and then right in the start. I mean, it's just it feels.
Yeah, you get in a rhythm.
You get in a flow rhythm.
Like you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and so when that first depth chart comes out, although it was late,
usually we arrive for the first media luncheon on the Monday before the first game, and the first thing everybody does is grab the game notes and flip over to the depth chart page and furiously start typing on Twitter or blogs or wherever to try to get this stuff out. This
and
year,
that's what
I did.
I did. I got there early.
You were the first person to sign in?
Well, but I wasn't the first person there. I was just the first person, I guess, to notice the sign-in sheet. But, yeah, I got there. I grabbed the game notes. I flipping through. No depth chart.
Yeah. But later, after Bob Stoops had talked a little bit about the depth chart at the Monday press conference, there was an official depth chart released. And Jason, there's a lot of interesting things here, but to you, what was the number one most interesting thing when you looked at the depth chart?
Well, I think there were a lot of things.
Well, that's why I asked the number one.
Well, I'm trying to sort that out in my head here. Number one, I will say the most interesting is the receivers, with 4 receiver spots on the depth chart, and on one of them, you got Jarvis Baxter, walk-on, Grant Bothan, walk-on, then Micaiah Quick.
Yeah, and it's not really a stretch for Baxter. I think a lot of people expected him to at least eventually be a contributor. I don't know if we expected him to be listed as a starter right off the bat, but Grant Bothan, as you know, he's had a memorable role and done some good things, but never a wide receiver. To see him ahead of a guy who started 2 games last year,
he's done one really good thing that I can think of, and that was in the Bedlam game, 2013. But so that was kind of amazing to see that. And I don't know. Some people have suggested on Twitter, are they sending a message to Micaiah Quick? Maybe. I think they use the depth chart for that, even if Bob says they don't. I think they do. But at the same time, Micaiah Quick has had a hard time catching a ball in practice. He had a hard time catching the ball in games some last year. I've had some people ask, would he move to defensive back? And I think he might. I mean, he was a good defensive back in high school, and he was recruited as an athlete, not a receiver. I don't think I'd be all that surprised. You know what they always say, that DBs are receivers who can't catch
the ball.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's where he's going to end up. I don't know, but that was very interesting to me. I also was interested in Alex Ross not being listed on the running backs, and I get why. I am surprised just because he was the second leading rusher last year. He did some good things, but at the same time, I'm not all that surprised because we've heard so much about Daniel Brooks, and then obviously we know about P. Ryan and Mixon. So there's that. And then the thing that made absolutely no sense is why Sterling Shepard is still listed as a punt returner. That is ridiculous.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to bring up, number one. I mean, last year they struggled so much with punt returns when Sterling Shepard was healthy, but he struggled with injury problems the last half of the season, and Zach Sanchez was basically back there as just the fair catch guy. I think he returned maybe 1 or 2, something like that.
Yeah,
not very many at all. And you heard coming into the after the recruiting cycle, you heard, well, D.D. Westbrook is this fantastic punt returner, and maybe some of that has to do with Westbrook missing some time, and maybe that affects him more at punt returning rather than his wide receiver spot. But it is interesting that still Sterling Shepard and Zach Sanchez are listed at 1 and 2 on the punt return spot. And no D.D. Westbrook, no Joe Mixon, who Bob Stoops brought up Monday as a guy who I believe the phrase he said was has got a good shot to take over that spot soon, but he's at least the third guy right now. And punt returning generally has been something that's been pretty good during the Bob Stoops era. It was great when Jalen Saunders was back there a couple years ago, but was really a non-factor last year.
Yeah, and I don't know what it is that made Sterling Shepard have so much trouble. I mean, and that was before he got hurt. And to me, he didn't do a very good job of it last year when he was doing it. And then number two, why would you risk getting him hurt?
You know how big he is for your offense.
We saw how valuable he was last year, after he was hurt, and so I don't know why you would even risk it. I mean, I agree with the idea that the most important thing back there is to catch the ball. I mean, that's the most important thing, to catch the ball. But I think that if you have guys who can be dynamic playmakers back there, that's who you should put back there. If they can catch the ball and make plays, and that's what they had with Jalen Saunders. That's what they had to some degree with Justin Brown. That's what they had with Broyles was returning punts before, right?
Yeah, I believe he did.
So, I mean, that sort of is a little bit baffling to me.
And another interesting area to me, Jason, is the secondary on the depth chart. We knew, obviously, Zach Sanchez and Ahmad Thomas and Jordan Thomas, but Hatari Bird is a guy who came in with very high expectations. His freshman year, he told our man Trent Shadid that he was going to start when he got here. Hasn't happened. Sort of almost fell off the face of the earth last year, but he's all of a sudden listed as the starter at the free safety spot with Stephen Parker at nickel. Yeah,
I'm not terribly surprised by that. That kind of makes sense because I think Parker is going to be the nickel. But I think when they don't play with a nickel, I think Parker will move back
to
that free safety spot. But yeah, I mean, Hatari Bird's a guy that he expected to start right away, and I expected him to at least get a shot to start that season, and it didn't work out with Gabe Lynn, taking over that spot and playing pretty well. But yeah, it's going to be real interesting to see how that all works because obviously Hatari hasn't played well enough to get on the field. Ahmad Thomas looked very confused at times last year. Didn't really make very many plays that I can really remember. And so it'll be very interesting to see how long they give them to really step up before they decide that they might want to go to some of those true freshmen who are right there behind them.
Yeah, you've got this massive amount of freshmen right behind these guys. You look at the depth chart, and I think it speaks to some of the issues that they've had the last couple of years, but there's freshmen all over the place. You've got PJ and Bonasor listed as a backup at corner to Jordan Thomas. You've got Marcus Green, a redshirt freshman. We'll touch on him in just a minute, but backing up Sanchez. And then you've got Khalil Houghton and Will Sunderland backing up the two safety spots. So there's a lot of inexperience when you talk about depth in the secondary.
Yeah, it's and that I think for all the gains they could potentially make by all being under one coach, by having Kerry Cooks coach them, there is a concern that inexperience might I don't know neutralize some of that and neutralize some of those gains and But I don't know. I mean, I guess we'll have to see how things work out, how they rotate them in and out. But we know that true freshman guys in the secondary typically have a lot of trouble, and you understand it. They're adapting to the speed of the game. They're adapting to playing against highly skilled wide receivers and slot guys and tight ends that guys who have skills and talent that these guys never went up against in high school, and having to learn new ways to cover them. And I think that's what Jordan Thomas dealt with last year, and that's what Stephen Parker dealt with last year, and that's what some of these guys are going to deal with this year. And OU has got to get to a point where they have enough depth in the secondary to where the starters are seniors and juniors, and the backups are juniors and sophomores. And until they get to that point, I think they're going to have problems.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you on that. I mentioned Marcus Green a second ago, and it's amazing to see his name there. Last year, he was a guy that got talked about as a guy who had a chance to play as a true freshman during camp, wound up not happening, redshirted, There was a report over the offseason that he was gone. He was going to transfer. And I don't know that even when he came back, we expected Marcus Green to be heard from much. And now all of a sudden he's backing up Zach Sanchez at that other cornerback spot. And surely the way that they've got to rotate guys, he's going to have to play a good amount, especially given that he's about the only guy on that second unit that's not a true freshman.
Yeah, although, I don't really feel like the corners rotate in and out all that much.
And it won't be much, I don't think.
I think he might play some, but I wouldn't expect him to play much. But the very fact that he's the number 2 guy there says a lot about the camp he had. And I also think it says a lot about the 2 junior corners that they have, Dakota Austin and Stan Von Taylor, who have completely disappeared off the face of the earth. And
Sam Von Taylor's a guy who started a game a couple years
ago as
a true freshman.
He started, I think, his 3rd game as a true freshman, and he's been a complete non-factor since then. Dakota Austin played some in the Sugar Bowl against Alabama, and he hadn't been heard from at all. So it's kind of fascinating to me that these guys aren't even listed on the depth chart. And I thought Dakota Austin was going to start potentially over Julian Wilson last year. And then I think he only played in 6 games. Stan Von Taylor played in every game, but it was all on special teams. So that's all very interesting to me.
Yeah, also interesting, just sort of sticking with the defensive side of the ball. When you go at linebacker, I don't think there was any big surprise at inside linebacker that Jordan Evans was ahead of Frank Shannon. But I think that's an area that I'm really looking forward to see Saturday, how that plays out as far as any kind of rotation, how much playing time he gets versus Shannon versus Dominique Alexander, and how much they use linebackers, period.
Yeah, I wasn't surprised to see Evans starting. I sort of expected that, especially after Shannon, not only missed all of last season, but then missed a sizable portion of fall camp with an injury. So no surprise there, but I do think Shannon's going to play a lot, and if he can get back to his 2013 form, that's a really good thing for OU because he was arguably the best returning defensive player before his suspension.
Yeah, and then moving up to the line where they had a lot to replace with Jordan Phillips right in the middle, but they've got Matt Romar there, Matt Diamond and Charles Walker at the other spot. They're going to change up what they use as far as we're probably not going to see a 3-man front with, striker coming off the edge all the time. They're going to do some a little bit different looks with those guys at times at least, and even on the back end with the defense is just going to look different this year with, not having that big guy like Jordan Phillips to anchor the middle of things, but it seems like they feel pretty good about what Romar, Diamond, and Charles Walker can do on the interior of that defensive line.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think they definitely feel good about those guys. They've got a bunch of talent there on the defensive line. DJ Ward is a guy who I think might play some. And then I'll be interested to sort of see how they use that spot listed on the depth chart as defensive end / outside linebacker. That's Eric Stryker and Devontae Bond. See how exactly they line up. That'll all be very interesting to watch as well.
Yeah, and the other thing on the offensive side of the ball, the offensive line, to have both offensive linemen on the left side be young guys. You've got a redshirt freshman at tackle, Orlando Brown. How about that? A redshirt freshman starting at offensive tackle, at left offensive tackle for the Sooners. And then Jonathan Alvarez at left guard, a sophomore who played a lot, especially on special teams last year. They really like this guy and what he does, and he stepped up and earned that job that was vacated by Adam Shedd. And then the other side of the line, the right side of the line, is the experience with Neela Kazatati and Josiah St. John.
Yeah, although I'm not sure I'd call it experience. Josiah St. John hadn't played all that much.
Yeah, well, compared to the left side, I guess is what I'm saying.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be fascinating to watch. For a while in fall camp, it looked like Josiah St. John was going to be the left tackle, and Derek Farniok was going to be on the right side. They've kind of switched some of that up. But Orlando Brown, I think, had a really good camp. I also think that speaks some to the fact that I don't think they I think they've reached a point with Derek Farniok. I mean, I just don't think he's ever going to – I mean, he's a senior now, and he's huge, and when he was recruited, he's such a big guy. There's a lot of potential there. It just hasn't worked out, and so at this point, I think that – I don't know if that's more of a reflection of Orlando Brown is really, really good, or they really don't feel comfortable with putting Derek Farniok in the starting lineup.
Yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I mean, you talk about how big Derek Farniok is, and Orlando Brown's every bit as big, and it's amazing looking at the height and weights on the depth chart that you've got Farniok, who's a mountain of a man at 6'8", 339. Well, Orlando Brown is 6'8" as well, and a few pounds heavier than Derek Farniok. So, he's clearly got the bloodlines to be a big-time lineman at not only this level but beyond, with what his dad, Orlando Brown, was able to do in the NFL. But you never know how it's going to come together, and he's a guy who we wondered if he would ever make it to campus after he switched from Tennessee right on signing day a couple years ago. He worked hard and did it, set out last year, and now he's in a great position to be the blindside guy for Baker Mayfield.
Yeah, and so, so much of that offensive line, that offensive line is going to be so important, not only in protecting Baker Mayfield, but in, opening up running lanes for Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon. And so, obviously, those guys can't have the type of season that I think a lot of people feel like they're going to be capable of having if they don't have much help up front. But I think Bill Bedenbaugh is a really great offensive line coach. I think if anybody could get him ready, it's him. But like in the secondary, I mean, it's amazing to me the lack of depth that they have at these positions. I mean, the fact that the backup center listed is a walk-on.
Yeah, although I don't think that if
I think Alvarez would move over.
Yeah, I think there's no doubt that Alvarez would move over.
But still, I mean, the fact that it's listed that way.
Yeah.
And the fact that there are guys on campus who have been there a couple of years. Christian Daimler's been there a couple of years, and he's nowhere to be found on the depth chart. I mean, where are some of these guys that they recruited? And I think that we're seeing the effects of the last couple of years of James Patton and Bruce Kittle's recruiting, and we're seeing that, and we're seeing it, the last couple of years of some pretty bad defensive back recruiting, or at least subpar.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. All right, Jason, one more spot we've got to touch on, and it was an interesting one yesterday. Nick Hodgson and Austin Seibert had been in a battle for the place-kicking duties. Jack Steed and Austin Seibert had been in a battle for the punting duties. And yesterday, Bob Stoops says that Austin Seibert, the true freshman who has a little bit of swagger to him, I guess you would say, has won both of those jobs, is going to handle both the place-kicking and punting duties for this team.
Yeah, and he's a guy who said on this podcast, he was a guest on this podcast last season, and he said he wanted to kick, he wanted to punt, and he wanted to be kickoff specialist.
He didn't win the kickoff specialist. He didn't get all three. Job.
Well, that's understandable, though, because Hodgson's done it so well.
Yeah,
but
I think Bill Bedenbaugh said at one point, well, we were, second or third, or maybe, no, it wasn't Bill Bedenbaugh, obviously. It was
Jay
Boulware. Said, well, we were, second or third in the nation last year. What are we going to be first? What's the difference in that? They know what Nick Hodgson can do, and that he can be effective there. But to have Austin Seibert do that and be trusted enough to do both of those things at once says a lot about what this kid brings. Now, who knows what happens on Saturdays when it's live action and you're playing in front of 85,000 people for the first time.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is he's very confident. There's no doubt about that. You get that from talking to him. And confidence is so important when you're a kicker. I mean, it's important when you're anything. But when you're a field goal kicker in those pressure situations, if you don't have that confidence, you can't perform. And I think we saw some lack of confidence at least last half of last season from Michael Honeycutt. And they can't afford to have a repeat of that, because if they do, they're going to lose some more close games, and they just can't have that.
Yeah, so that'll be something interesting to watch Saturday. Jason, we've talked about a lot of these position battles and what the depth chart shaped out at. We talked about how they're going to use the linebackers. What are you most looking forward to seeing Saturday, just about either formation or strategy or things like that?
Well, I mean, I'm kind of interested to see how they come out the first series, who starts at the receiver spots. I'm interested to see how fast they play. I think that's something that's going to be really important to watch, and how well Baker Mayfield handles this. I mean, I know he started Big 12 games before. This isn't a Big 12 game, but he started college big time games before, but he hasn't done it in a long time, and it'll be real interesting to see how he handles it. How long of a leash they give him. If he comes out and throws 3 picks in this game against Akron, are they going to let him start in Knoxville, or are they going to go back to Trevor Knight? I don't know. I mean, to me, that is absolutely the most fascinating thing. And we don't need to talk about the quarterback depth chart because we already knew what that was going to say.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. I'm with you on everything that you mentioned there offensively. Also looking to see how they use the defensive lineman, what that looks like. You mentioned Eric Stryker and how they use him. And Devontae Bond off the edge. That'll certainly be interesting. But the good thing is we no longer have to talk about all this stuff because we'll actually see it here in just a few days on Saturday, 6 p.m. in Norman, OU versus Akron. But up until then and beyond, you can check us out every day at newsok.com and every morning in the Oklahoman for the best OU coverage anywhere.